Vanessa Hartley seemed like the perfect mother in the perfect neighborhood until her children started collapsing at school. One by one, what investigators uncovered next revealed a disturbing secret hidden behind her closed doors. Vanessa had been quietly drugging her kids with marijuana edibles and vape pens, believing it was a smarter way to parent. The streets were clean, the lawns were trimmed, and the houses stood tall with bright paint and flower-filled porches. With 3 kids under the age of 10, she found life overwhelming. She had no local family, few friends, and almost no support system. Soon, Vanessa convinced herself that this was a new kind of parenting, modern, controlled, even beneficial. She began giving microdoses to the kids, usually during stressful times before school tests, family outings, or days when she just didn't feel like dealing with noise or mess. But when the doctors ran a toxicology screen, the results stunned everyone. She rushed to the hospital, appearing frantic and confused. When questioned, she denied any knowledge of how her child could have ingested THC. She suggested the possibility of another child giving him something, or that perhaps he had picked something up off the ground. Her explanations didn't sit right with the investigators, but there was no direct evidence linking her to the incident at least not yet. The small child had tested positive for high levels of THC, the psychoactive compound found in marijuana. While this might have seemed like an overreaction to some, the gravity of the hospital findings demanded caution. Vanessa was furious and claimed she was being targeted unfairly. She portrayed herself as a struggling single mother who had done everything right and was now being victimized by a broken system. However, the caseworker assigned to the children began to notice patterns that raised suspicions even further. It was just trace amount CYT was enough to cause hallucinations and severe impairment in a child of his size. The doctors alerted both the police and Child Protective Services without hesitation. She labeled the edibles in their snack bags as fruit chews, wrapped in foil, and told the children they were special calm-down treats. They trusted her and never questioned it. What she did have was an internet connection, and late at night after the kids went to bed, she found herself scrolling through endless threads and forums about parenting, anxiety, and natural remedies. Vanessa seemed like a mother who had everything under control. But beneath the perfect suburban mask, something deeply disturbing had already begun to grow, and soon the truth would begin to leak out in ways no one could ignore. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when the first real sign of trouble emerged. The youngest of Vanessa's children, 6-year-old Elijah, was playing outside during recess when he suddenly sat down on the pavement and refused to get up. His teacher initially thought he was being stubborn, but when she approached him, she noticed his eyes were unfocused and his body was trembling slightly. When she asked if he was okay, he simply mumbled that everything felt wobbly. Within minutes, he became visibly disoriented, unable to stand properly, and eventually slumped to the ground. Panic erupted among the staff, and an ambulance was immediately called. One of those late-night searches led her into the world of cannabis-based treatments. At first, it was curiosity. She read about how marijuana edibles helped adults manage anxiety and sleeplessness. She watched influencers talk about using gummies to relax and quiet their minds. Some claimed it even helped them become better, more patient parents. People smiled as they passed each other, walking dogs or jogging in the early morning light. It was the kind of place where people believed bad things didn't happen. Tucked into this quiet town was Vanessa Hartley, a single mother of 3, who had recently moved into a neat rental home on Maple Drive. Her life looked organized from the outside. The neighbors saw a woman who appeared responsible, always walking her kids to the bus stop, just waving politely and returning inside without much small talk. This isn't just a story of crime, it's a shocking descent into delusion, deception, and betrayal. In the picturesque neighborhood of Westfield Pines, everything seemed peaceful. Vanessa ordered CBD gummies for herself and began using them during the day. When those no longer gave the calming effect she needed, she shifted to stronger products, THC-based gummies, vape pens, and oils. They dulled the edge of her stress, allowed her to get through the day with a smile, and made parenting feel manageable. But when her youngest son had a meltdown one afternoon, and she couldn't calm him with timeouts or talking, an idea crossed her mind. A tiny piece of gummy might help, she thought, just enough to settle him. Vanessa had gone through a lot. After a bitter divorce 2 years earlier, She was left to manage a household by herself. What started as harmless research turned into quiet experimentation. It worked. He became calm, unusually quiet. The next day, she gave a small piece to her daughter when she was throwing a tantrum. That worked too. No one noticed. The kids remained polite and quiet. Teachers assumed they were shy. At the hospital, Elijah was treated for what was believed to be a medical emergency, possibly a seizure or a diabetic reaction. Back at the school, administrators contacted Vanessa to inform her about her son's condition and the strange toxicology results. Child Protective Services initiated a temporary safety measure and placed Elijah and his two siblings in emergency foster care. While this might have seemed like an overreaction to some, the gravity of the hospital findings demanded caution. Vanessa was furious and claimed she was being targeted unfairly. She portrayed herself as a struggling single mother who had done everything right and was now being victimized by a broken system. Her kitchen appeared spotless, and the children's rooms were neatly arranged. But something felt off. A faint, sweet smells lightly herbal lingered in the air, especially around the pantry. No obvious drugs were found in plain sight, but the officers noted tightly sealed bins and containers that seemed out of place among the children's snacks and household items. Inside were multiple packages of THC-infused edibles disguised as regular candies. Each child's name was listed with dates, dosages, and brief notes. Kayla Hoff gummy before Tescom, quiet. Elijah 1/4 square, after tantrum slept through dinner. The entries stretched back for months, indicating a consistent pattern of dosing. Vanessa had gone so far as to repackage the edibles to resemble homemade snacks. To a child, they looked like harmless treats. To authorities, it was premeditated deception. People who had once waved at Vanessa or complimented her garden now struggled to reconcile the image of a friendly mother with the reality of the evidence. How to hide vape pens from authorities. And even forum discussions where parents casually shared experiences using cannabis to soften behavior. In fact, she openly admitted to administering THC to her children, but insisted it wasn't abuse. It was, in her words, an alternative form of behavior management. These forums, largely unregulated and tucked away in the deep corners of the internet, were filled with discussions about how cannabis could be used to manage everything from tantrums to attention disorders. Vanessa had immersed herself in these discussions for months. She became convinced that modern medicine was failing parents, and that natural solutions, though controversial, were worth trying. Slowly, she developed her own methods, dosages, and routines, convinced she was helping her children. She spoke with calm assurance, describing how traditional discipline methods had failed her, and how she believed that cannabis offered a more natural, holistic approach to parenting. She portrayed herself as a forward-thinking mother who simply refused to accept the conventional pressures placed on overwhelmed parents. What began as quiet curiosity had evolved into a chilling practice, and it was now unfolding in the cold light of day. Behind closed doors, investigators described the findings as some of the most calculated they had seen in a child abuse case. The level of planning, the effort to disguise, and the repeated exposure pointed to something far darker than negligence. This wasn't accidental. This was systematic and intentional. There were brightly colored wrappers mimicking well-known brands. But upon closer inspection, all had labels indicating cannabis content. She tried to explain the items away, claiming they were hers for personal use. That the notebook was just a way to track her own intake, not the children's. But the pages were too specific. There was no denying what the logs revealed. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a direct link between what Vanessa kept hidden and what had harmed her kids. The case was no longer a matter of suspicion. It was now a full-fledged criminal investigation. The officers also retrieved surveillance footage from a local dispensary that showed Vanessa entering with a fake medical marijuana ID. She had been purchasing high-dose products almost weekly under a false name. Alongside the edibles were 5 vape pens, various oil cartridges, and a digital scale. But most disturbing was a worn spiral notebook containing handwritten entries. A warrant was quietly being prepared. However, the caseworker assigned to the children began to notice patterns that raised suspicions even further. The community of Westfield Pines remained unaware, but law enforcement now suspected that this mother was hiding something no one could have imagined. The other 2 children, 8-year-old Kayla and 10-year-old Marcus underwent medical evaluations. Both showed similar symptoms: sluggish reaction times, low energy, and mild THC levels in their systems. It became clear that this was not a one-time accident. Someone had given them marijuana products multiple times, and that someone had to be someone they were with daily. Investigators returned to Vanessa's home to look for clues. The officers arrived early in the morning, accompanied by investigators from Child Protective Services. Vanessa appeared caught off guard, but maintained her innocence. She insisted that the entire situation was a misunderstanding, claiming someone must have tampered with her children's food without her knowledge. Her demeanor was tense, but she remained composed till the investigators opened the hallway closet. What had started as a single frightening medical incident was evolving into something far more sinister. 2 days after the incident at school, a search warrant was granted for Vanessa Hartley's home. Behind coats and stacked board games was a locked plastic bin, sealed tightly with duct tape and a rusted latch. Once opened, the contents spoke volumes. The notebook revealed detailed logs. As evidence was photographed and bagged, Vanessa's composure began to crack. In another corner of the closet, they found packaging materials, foil wraps, resealable pouches, and child-friendly stickers. Forensic tests later confirmed that the substances found in the closet matched the THC compounds present in the children's blood. Neighbors were stunned when news of the raid began to spread. As the investigation expanded, so did the story. Vanessa's internet history was pulled, revealing searches about child-safe THC dosages. Vanessa Hartley was soon required to undergo a court-ordered psychological evaluation. What emerged from those sessions left professionals stunned. Vanessa didn't deny her actions. She recounted how she'd discovered online communities that promoted non-traditional child-rearing practices. These forums, largely unregulated and tucked away in the deep corners of the internet, were filled with discussions about how cannabis could be used to manage everything from tantrums to attention disorders. Vanessa had immersed herself in these discussions for months. She became convinced that modern medicine was failing parents, and that natural solutions, though controversial, were worth trying. Slowly, she developed her own methods, dosages, and routines, convinced she was helping her children. During evaluations, Vanessa detailed how she started with small doses, always watching carefully for side effects. Some tried to paint Vanessa as a victim of poor mental health and societal neglect, while others labeled her a manipulative abuser. One thread showed her discussing how a specific brand of gummy helped reset her youngest son after meltdowns. Vanessa Hartley had weaponized parenting under the guise of wellness and, in doing so, left a trail of broken trust, silent children, every detail of the case. From the children's toxicology reports to Vanessa's online forum posts, was dissected by legal analysts and outraged parents alike. Prosecutors presented a case built not only on physical evidence, but on the disturbing psychological mindset behind Vanessa's actions. They called in a psychologist who testified that Vanessa showed signs of delusional thinking and emotional exhaustion. The judge, in delivering the sentence, remarked that Vanessa's crimes were disguised in care, but rooted in cruelty. Privacy orders were issued to shield them from further media exposure. Though physically unharmed, the emotional scars ran deep. Therapists reported that the children struggled with trust, confusion, and a lingering sense of betrayal. They had believed their mother was helping them, not hurting them. She was sentenced to 14 years in prison, with mandatory psychiatric treatment as part of her incarceration. And states began pushing for new legislation around cannabis packaging and child safety. School districts quietly introduced new training for staff to recognize signs of substance exposure in students. The courtroom remained quiet as she was led away, expression unreadable, the weight of her decisions finally catching up to her. They claimed she was not a criminal, but a desperate woman who had been misled by misinformation. However, her clear record-keeping and unwavering belief in her actions undermined any hope of leniency. Her own words in court when she described THC as just a plant and called her parenting methods ahead of their time only deepened concern about her judgment. The jury listened as experts testified about the effects of THC on developing brains, describing in sobering detail how even small doses could impair memory, cognitive function, and emotional stability in children. In a community struggling to understand how something so unthinkable could unfold right next door, Another included advice she gave to a fellow parent about how to disguise the smell of vape oils with essential oils. These weren't cries for help. They were signs of someone who believed she was a pioneer. It served as a silent reminder that danger doesn't always come with warning signs or loud alarms. Sometimes it hides behind smiles and snack bags. Dressed as care, cloaked in love, and almost invisible till it isn't. The jury saw images of the disguised gummy wrappers, the homemade labels, and the altered lunchbox snacks. Her internet searches painted a clear picture of premeditation. This was indeed a moment of desperation, but a long-term plan she carried out over months. The courtroom sat in silence as video footage was played showing one of her children stumbling down the front porch steps. Disoriented and confused, the impact was powerful and left little room for doubt about the harm that had occurred. Online debates flared over parental pressure, the misuse of cannabis, and the growing trend of unregulated parenting advice on the internet. The story struck a nerve. It wasn't just about drugs or abuse, it was about trust, modern parenting, and the dangerous line between seeking help and causing harm. She believed she was being responsible, describing how she would record behavior changes and adjust quantities accordingly. But what she failed to grasp or refused to see was that the children were suffering. Teachers had noted months earlier that the kids often appeared distracted, drowsy, and detached in class. Marcus, her oldest, had started to show signs of chronic fatigue and struggled to stay awake in the afternoons. Kayla had become increasingly withdrawn, no longer participating in group activities she once enjoyed. None of this registered with Vanessa as harm. In her mind, the kids were quieter, more manageable, and less emotionally volatile. That meant her plan was working. She genuinely believed her actions were justifiable, and that society would one day understand. Her detachment from reality only deepened concerns from prosecutors, who now had to consider not just the criminal nature of her behavior, but also the mental stability behind it. The public was divided. News of the case spread quickly, with headlines ranging from shock to outrage. Prosecutors gathered additional evidence, including Vanessa's posts in anonymous forums, where she had bragged about her methods. The court now faced the task of determining how to handle a case that didn't fit into a neat legal category. Vanessa Hartley's trial began under intense media scrutiny. Reporters filled the courtroom, cameras hovered outside, and public opinion buzzed across social media. The prosecution portrayed Vanessa as methodical and deliberate, highlighting the dosing logs she had kept in her notebook. Vanessa's defense argued that she was a struggling mother, isolated and unsupported, suffering from untreated mental health issues. Ultimately, the jury found her guilty on all major counts: felony child endangerment, legal distribution of controlled substances to minors, and 3 counts of child abuse. The aftermath rippled far beyond the courtroom. Her 3 children, still under psychological care, were placed with relatives in another state. The case sparked a national reckoning. Parenting forums came under scrutiny. Online platforms tightened their monitoring of alternative child-rearing discussions. In the quiet cul-de-sac of Westfield Pines, the house where Vanessa once lived stood empty, its curtains drawn, its garden overgrown. It served as a silent reminder that danger doesn't always come with warning signs or loud alarms. Sometimes it hides behind smiles and snack bags, dressed as care, cloaked in love, and almost invisible till it isn't.